It's my great pleasure to welcome back to the Good Morning Portugal podcast, star of our radio show, our former radio show, Michael Heron, who was our news, culture and sports guy. Michael, are you there?
I am. Hello. Good morning, Carl. How are you doing?
Nice very well. It's just like the old days.
Yeah, Heron and Munson are back.
Indeed. And we're looking for some punditry from you and professional insight, I should put it.
Wow.
On this Brexit business, which is really starting to heat up now. And I've got to say, I was thinking I'd escaped. You know, we're a couple of UK expats, aren't we, in Portugal? And to some extent, you can feel like you're sort of distanced from it. But then there are a few kind of practicalities that make you realise that we should be keeping an eye on it, like, you know, nationality and passports and all sorts of conditions that might apply if we don't keep our eye on it. How are you feeling about it generally on a personal level, as someone who's been in Portugal for a while, and your view as a Brit looking across the continent?
Yeah, well, obviously, on a personal level, I've already made the decision that next year I'm going to apply for Portuguese nationality, which probably tells you a lot about how I'm feeling about the whole Brexit situation. And I think this is an interesting thing for expats to know, that the law has actually now changed. So previously, you had to be a resident of Portugal for 6 years before you could become a Portuguese national. It's now actually changed to 5. So I'll be 5 years in Portugal next year, which means I can then apply. It takes about a year, the entire process. So anyone considering doing it should bear that in mind, that there is a lot of paperwork to file. It is worth consulting with someone professional who can take care of the application process for you. And there's also the language exam that you have to pass, although it's quite a basic level. So it shouldn't be too much difficulty to someone that's been living in Portugal for a while. So that's an important aspect for anyone to consider that's living here or considering coming here before Brexit officially happens.
Great advice.
Aside from that, I was fortunate enough to have a conversation with the I think she's now the former British ambassador, because I think she's leaving this month, or she's already left. Kirsty Hayes. Yeah. So I had a conversation with her recently, and she said that the information she'd received from the Portuguese authorities was that anybody who is already a resident in Portugal now from the UK isn't mandatorily required to become a Portuguese national for their future status to be guaranteed here. Having said that, this can change, so people should be aware that these things can change in the future. But it does sound like Portugal and the UK will do everything possible to keep their relationship going, and to try and guarantee.
Hold on a minute. So let's unpack your hobnobbing with the great and good in the institution there. It's you don't have to register, or you should register, and it will be seen favourably. I mean, this isn't a binding thing by any means. But what was the sense that you got from her?
Well, so as you know, when you move to Portugal from any country that's a member of the European Union, you can become you're required to become a European registered resident, which means you can then reside in Portugal for 5 years, which you can then renew permanently after that.
Okay.
Or I think it's on a 5-year basis. I'm not too sure. It's one or the other. Usually it's you either apply for permanent residency or I think you then have to renew every 5 years, something like that. And if you want to, after 5 years, it used to be 6, but now it's 5, you can become a Portuguese citizen, which means you'd have a Portuguese passport and all the same rights as a Portuguese citizen. And the advantage of being from the United Kingdom, and there are a number of other countries in Europe which is the same, but you need to check your own country's sort of policy to make sure that's correct, is that you don't have to then give up your British passport or nationality. So you can keep dual nationality, you can keep both passports and keep the the sort of the same rights as if you were in both countries.
Excellent.
But so to answer your question in terms of Brexit and everything, I mean, I think definitely now the media are sort of spewing out their narrative on a more regular basis as the sort of the official day that we leave is looming on the horizon, and obviously still very divided.
Well, what's your insight from a professional level? Because people I speak to, and the people I tend to speak to, are like taxi drivers or my barber, or like people who own small businesses. And on that level, it would appear that nobody Portuguese wants to be in the EU. And it's by no means scientific research, but that's the feeling I get. And I know that you're dealing with a lot of professional people and the professional services at that level and on the sort of fringes of Portuguese politics. What are people feeling? Is it the same sort of divide that your everyday folks are just angry with politicians and they want to be away from it, and on that basis they want their own Brexit, like I called it a Lusaida, which is the Portuguese exit. Do you see what I did there?
Yeah, it was good. That was really good, actually. Well done.
Okay. And then, in apart from the kind of everyday people who want to seek vengeance on politicians who want to leave the EU, you have professionals who think this is going to be a terrible upheaval here, and it's going to be people are going to suffer. So let's just stay in because it's better the devil you know. Does that mirrored across in Portugal as it appears to be in Britain as well?
I think so. I think these days, I think we've discussed this before, is that the credibility of a politician has really, gone downhill. And so they're not trusted as a group of individuals or as a collective anymore in the way that they maybe were. Well, I don't know if they ever were, but maybe in the past more so than they are now. And I think that there's this skepticism that, this sort of institutional group of countries that has existed for many years. Don't forget, originally to stop Germany from rearming after World War II. So it was initially a peace issue, which they've managed to to keep. But then that's expanded to other sort of economic and then political
machinations
which have kept us all together, which have kept us all together. Now, it's difficult for me to have this conversation because I was someone that my degree was in European studies. So my degree was actually studying the history of Europe and how these countries are affected and what the future is looking like. And I graduated in 2005, so obviously the world was a different place then. Back then, the debate was whether the UK should enter the euro. Wow. And I think Tony Blair, who was very pro-Europe, and I think this says a lot about the man, even though he has a lot of faults and a lot of negative press still. He wanted, as far as I can understand, he wanted the UK to enter the EU, but UK PLC told him not to, and that Britain would benefit by keeping the pound. And he listened to UK PLC, and that was one of the reasons why the UK didn't enter the euro, which at the time was a very good decision, I think. So we have this historical legacy of that, which meant that up until the Brexit vote, the UK was in a strong position in my mind, in that we were still quite independent, but had all the benefits of being part of the EU. Now, I was someone that was quite skeptical about the EU when I graduated, and I'd actually spent 6 months working for an MEP in Brussels, so I got to see things on the inside. And that was in 2003, just before or just after, I think, a whole block of 10 countries were joining the EU. So the EU size grew dramatically in that period, welcoming countries from Eastern Europe, countries like Cyprus and Malta as well. So the whole dynamic changed massively and the culture changed massively. And I think this issue of culture keeps cropping up, doesn't it? And it's, how someone in Malta can relate to someone in Brussels or Luxembourg or London as being a European. Now, clearly that, in my mind, doesn't exist. I think it's very difficult to group, so many different countries and cultures and call them European. I think that presents a lot of challenges and difficulties, especially when clearly, historically, there's been a group of countries that have had more benefits from being part of the EU than the smaller, less economically well-off countries, which is probably why when you speak to people on the street in Portugal, much like if you spoke to people in Greece or Spain, they probably would rather not be part of it. But there have been clearly some benefits for countries like Portugal and Spain for becoming part of the EU in terms of the infrastructure and a lot of things that have improved, but obviously clearly not enough, in a lot of people's eyes. So it's a really difficult, we can only talk about how we feel it affects us in the UK, and in Portugal we can't really speak for all the other different countries. But clearly, what's happening with Brexit is going to affect everyone.
Yeah,
and it could signal an exodus of more countries wanting to leave, depending on how the UK does leave or is allowed to leave. But I think my feeling is I'm more worried about UK business at the moment, because I think that's where, and people living in the UK at the moment, because I think they're the ones that are going to be the worst off from what's about to happen. I was reading an article the other day, actually, which was talking about the farming industry in the UK and how a lot of companies are now stockpiling certain produce, like chickens in particular, because they're worried about cheaper chicken importation from other parts of the world, such as China and Vietnam, and what that's going to do to the industry in the UK. So they're having to think, sort of 5 or 10 years ahead, and trying to plan their business and not really knowing what to do, and not really getting any answers from government or parliament either.
And arguably panicking, right? Because that's just, this is all part of the Project Fear thinking, isn't it? Is that,
yes,
we have an opportunity here to revision how we would like to do things. Or if you stay with the same mindset as we've currently got, you've got to go like for like, haven't you? But without the EU. So that makes people think, okay, we've got to import horrible chicken from Vietnam or whatever. I mean, no disrespect. When I say horrible, I just mean different farming standards.
Yeah.
But horrible.
Yeah.
Okay. And then that's what people are worried about, understandably.